Alright, welcome back everybody. Let's take the time machine way back to the year 1980 and look at one of the old first edition modules, as they used to call them up here, called Slave Pits of the Undercity. Now, this was actually a four-part series to itself against a powerful group called the Slave Lords, and we may look at all four of those or whatever. This was the one that started it. After that, the Slave Lord series led to the Three Giant series, which led into the descent below into the Underdark, which was the beginning of the Drow series, and then eventually Queen of the Demon Web Pits against Loth. So this was a very long series which could take forever to play all of them out, but they were definitely the best ever written, I believe. So we can see this was written by David Cook right here for levels 4 to 7. You can see some of the characters fighting what's called an aspis here. They look almost like they're insect humanoids, and I think this may have been the first insect humanoid race ever introduced in D&D. Again, this is first edition, really old stuff right here, so it's been around quite a while. Here's what you see on the back right here, right? So they always give you some nice little pictures, and here's all the other modules that were available at the time, and as you can see, very few of them had been written at this point right here. Here on the inside, they show map area, and it's pretty small. Up above, there's basically a group of burned buildings up on the surface. There's a temple. That's what's over here at area 18 and 19 and stuff like that. And most everything goes on down below, right? Notice how, again, this is called Slave Pits of the Undercity. So there's sort of this above area that's guarded. Here's a little map down here, shows what everything means. You can see there's traps and things such as that right there. Then you get down to the Undercity below ground. Here's where all the action's really going on. So if you look at these maps right here, side by side, you can see there's what they show as water areas is actually sewage. There's natural caverns, and there's also the slave pits themselves, which make for a very interesting encounter. We'll see how that looks when we get to it. But notice how they also give you these tournament maps. This was actually used, I believe it told, at Gen Con 13 back, I believe it was in 1980. So what they did was took the maps, right, these back here, and just took areas of them. And they made it very constant. That way, no matter what group of people went through it, they always encountered the same thing. And they also had pre-rolled characters. So again, they kept it just as constant as they possibly could. So this shows the areas right here. You can see where they start right here at this little secret door. They tell you that an escaped slave tells them how to get in this area here, and they follow it through this area, get down to 18. There's a trap door, takes you down to the Undercity. Then you get down here in the Undercity. Again, they've cut a lot of it out, so when you run the module, you know, just for your group, you'll get a whole lot more, but you can see this flooded sewer area and so on. And there's a whole bunch of slavers, largely orcs, half-orcs, other things such as that right there. So there's what they had right on the cover. And remember, back at the time, you may have heard TSR was who owned all this back then. So there's some of the original stuff. And you can tell by looking at the edges. I've had this book for 40 years. It's faded around the sides and so on down the line. So it's not a copy. But, of course, you go to DriveThru RPG. You can buy these now completely new for $5. And I'll show a link to that here at the end. So here we get into the beginning. They talk about the background. Pirates and slavers have started to really get aggressive in an area. They tell you they've been there for quite a while, but now their attacks have gotten much more frequent and vicious. They're burning entire villages. They're taking entire families. And they tell you that vast tracts of coastline have just been reduced to ashes. So they've gotten completely out of hand. These slavers have gotten so big and powerful, it's almost like they've gone to war with the area. So there have been some slaves that have escaped and have given people word, those in control, the lords and such, of a base for these slavers. So these lords who are in charge of these areas that are just being destroyed want groups of parties, right? Maybe one fails, so they send different groups. So, of course, that's what you have going on at the Gen Con convention right here. That's the story behind all this. They're going to send them to this area called Highport that was once a human city. Now it's just overrun by orcs, goblins, kobolds, ogres, gnolls, all the worst of society in the world right there. So there again, they tell you that this was used for tournament play back at Gen Con 13. And they even show a little scoring sheet at the end. If you ever wondered how they score one of these tournament games, at the very end, they show you how to do it. So if you wanted, you could actually play this module out, just as another adventure like you always do. Or you could take those smaller maps and actually play it just as they did at Gen Con and see how your score comes up. Be an interesting way to play it. So they tell you at the start right here, the adventurers find themselves outside the walls of this ruined temple compound. So there's more than just this temple. There's a big compound area. And they tell you this area has really been destroyed. It has been gutted and burnt. So at some time, somebody decided they'd had enough of these people and really tore this area out right here. Maybe it was the bad guys themselves as they took over the area and captured slaves. So they tell you the walls are stone, and if the characters take time, they will be able to observe the temple and see what goes on. So they can sort of hide at night in the shadows and just watch. They tell you they'll see frequent guards coming by on intervals and patrols right there. They tell you at times they'll see parties. There'll be groups of people visiting this area. Remember, this is a slaver compound basically. So slaves got to be coming in. Somebody could be coming in to buy them. There's a stable door and main gate entrances they mention right here. And they tell you they see merchants coming in. Maybe they're selling goods. Maybe they're buying slaves. Could be either one. So with the tournament start, they start at that secret entrance shown at the back of the temple. An escaped slave has shown them right where that was at, right? And that's just down here at this 1A. So for tournament play, that's where they're going to begin. Now, of course, you're just playing this as a regular campaign dungeon. People do whatever they want. They may want to go over a wall somewhere or whatever. But again, for tournament play, they tried to keep it constant. And of course, they had to be limited on time and so on down the line. So here's the Slave Pits module, as they used to call them. 6 to 8 characters, level 4 to 7. So starting to get just a little bit of ability right there. And like most groups, they tell you better have several fighters, at least one cleric, one magic user. That's what they used to call the wizards. And look at least one thief. That was what the rogues were called back first edition there too. And notice they tell you they better have magic weapons. Well, if they tell you they better have magic weapons, think what else that tells you. There's something in here that probably requires a magic weapon to be hit. Otherwise, they'd just be defenseless. So here's what they'll see at one of these little entrance areas right here. They always give you some pictures and such, and they give you the scope of the module. Again, mention Gen Con 13 right there. And notice how this is just the first of a 4-part series against the slave lords. So once the adventurers get through this area here, they can go to Slaver's Stockade. That was Module A2. Then they would actually go and take on the slave lords themselves. And they're actually really outmatched. It's expected that they will lose against the slave lords. And then they'll be thrown into dungeons and will actually start in the dungeons of the slave lords without any gear, no spells, no nothing. Very interesting way to start any type of campaign module or whatever. But starting in a dungeon has been done before. This was probably the very first time it was ever done in a module used for D&D. So again, all these are available on RPG, DriveThru RPG. You can get those like $5. I highly recommend them, and I'm sure they've converted them to 5e rules. So they tell you there's certain conventions followed in tournament play. So they're going to tell you, well, we got a few rules. You're going to pre-created characters. We'll see those at the very back of the book, so nobody had to just randomly roll. Again, they're trying to keep everybody's gameplay consistent. There won't be any wandering monsters in tournament play. So you see they've got tables for that, but of course, if you're not doing tournament, you use them. They tell you the monsters in tournament play show no mercy, no quarter. So there's not going to be negotiating with them or anything such as that. It's a fight to the death. None of the players are going to advance in level. Won't be time for that. And there's a scoring system. Again, we'll see that towards the end. So again, with non-tournament, they talk about encounters that you see in different areas. If they're around the walls of the compound, again, when they first arrive, look what they might see. Ghouls, zombies, skeletons. There's a very large graveyard to the center of this compound that the orcs and such will not go into unless they're in large numbers. Well, that's why right there. Sturges, look at harpies. Do not remember the last time I saw a harpy anywhere in D&D. Those seem to have sort of faded for some reason. So they give you some information on the individuals in the temple description. At some time, a great fire really damaged and destroyed this place. They tell you it was a 3-story building, but most of that has collapsed, so it's pretty much down to just one floor, and the roof over this area is being rebuilt. That way it's usable once again. So once they get inside the walls, there are the ruins encounter table. Remember, this area was really burned and destroyed heavily. So they might see some orcs. Look at this basilisk, right? Everybody's heard of those right there. Back at this time, you didn't get, a couple of saved attempts or whatever. You just saved or you returned to stone, and that was it. And at this level 4 to 7, that pretty much just meant death. And back in first edition, and also basic rules too, that was largely how a lot of things worked. Like with poison, a lot of time with poisons, it was roll or die, and that was it right there. Wasn't much damage, but sometimes they did. But you can see there might be ghouls, a wight, or maybe some slavers right there. So they tell you for the orcs, here's what you'll see if they're rolled on the table. And notice a lot of these orcs, half-orcs, or whatever, may be fighters of level 5 to 8. Some of them might be clerics or something else right there. So they're more than just your regular orc. So they talk about the slavers right here doing business. They'll be encountered probably by the group in this area, the adventurers. And they talk about wandering monsters. The aspis, again, are a group of humanoid insect. I think they pretty much took those out of 5e. Have no idea why. They're just always trying to replace them with something different that's basically the same thing. But they'll look at these at the end that look sort of like just big, giant walking insects or ants, and they're really tough. I think they can walk on their hind legs and attack with at least 2, and they always use like 2 swords, 2 axes. Maybe they got shields in some of their little insect hands, so they're pretty tough. So there's the basilisk. Look at this, crocodiles. You got to be kidding. Doppelgangers are relatively common, so are undead. There's green slime, some of the most dreaded stuff since the beginning of D&D right there. So there's your half-orcs, there's your harpies again. Again, they got a lot of classic monsters right here. Look at this, giant weasels. The slave lord that runs this place has giant weasels that protect him, so I'm assuming that's what those are for right there. And of course, if anything's encountered in these wandering tables, take it out of the room where you find them, right? There's a limited number of this stuff. So key to the temple level. Here's that secret door. Notice how there's a spike trap in there. So a rogue might detect this. A lot of people are smart enough. You go into an area, especially a secret door into a slaver region, you might want to check for some type of trap. So there they talk about the damage and how a thief, a rogue, could detect it right there. This is shown over here with room 4. That'll be over there. There's a bricked up room that's empty, a collapsed guard room. And notice in this guard room, 8 ghouls and 2 ghasts. So they're going to get right onto the undead right here real fast. Here's the treacherous floor, and they tell you there's basically 3 options, right? Going around the right or left side or down this plank in the middle. And I believe they tell you that plank right there is actually pretty sturdy, so they give you a little description in the box and all that to the side. But again, if somebody falls, they're going to fall and take 3 to 18 points of damage. It's pretty significant considering they're probably levels 5 to 7 right there. So a little bit further along, there's an alcove with some old soured wine and barrels, nothing there. But then right by it is a sundew's lair. I believe this is something else they've taken out of 5e. A sundew you may have seen before. It's basically a plant that's kin to the Venus flytrap. It has very sticky material all over. It likes to trap bugs. So this one right here sort of does that, but it also has tendrils, sort of like tentacles that'll run out and grab someone and pull them in and try and kill them and just dissolve them. So here's the treasure. They were a little more generous with the treasure items and such back in first edition and all. Your XP was largely dependent on how much treasure you found. Look at even a ring of spell storing. Well, it's a great one right off the bat right there. So further along, there's some stables, and they tell you these humans, which they give you in the description box, are actually half-orcs. A lot of these half-orcs kind of pass as human. They have a lot of that look to them. But notice they better be stealthy or quick when they come up on these half-orcs. There's a horn that one of them can blow and call for help. So they tell you these half-orcs will arrive according to the numbers found on the random encounter tables if that horn is blown. They'll be there in 2 to 5 rounds. But also in this stable area, hiding's a doppelganger. So when the characters defeat these orcs and such, this doppelganger is going to change into, oh, poor innocent slave, right? They captured me so on down the line. As soon as they can get one of the party members away on itself by themselves, It's going to try and kill them and take its place. Just what doppelgangers do. You want to bring paranoia into a group of adventurers, just bring in a doppelganger. They'll question everything they see and meet from there on out. So further along, there's a little shed, got 6 orcs standing guard, and they tell you that right by them is the cemetery. And they do not like this cemetery. It is a vicious place. Unless there's a whole lot of these orcs and half-orcs, they're not going into this area. But the players are going to have to cross through this cemetery. And it's very overgrown, but there is a path going through it. So they tell you again, this is avoided by all these orcs and half-orcs in the area. As the characters go through this area, which they probably will have to sooner or later, you roll a d6. So notice there's a 50-50 shot of an encounter. Well, what's going to happen right there? You roll a d8 to see what happens with an encounter. They tell you that the weeds will actually reach out and grab the individuals at times and actually try and block them from advancing any further. A tree branch might reach down and hit somebody for 1 to 6 points of damage. A bush will attempt to pick somebody's pocket. So these are like intelligent plant life in this area. There's some giant worker ants. Weeds try and entwine the legs. Look at this elf over here, how the weeds and such are wrapping up around his legs. Ghouls, bushes blocking the way, and a tree falls near the party and attacks. So they tell you that if the characters attempt to go off the path, the weeds really entangle them a great deal. It's practically constant. If they get really destructive, trying to chop everything down or burn it, the trees will actually move in and attack. And notice they're 10 hit dice monsters, so they're pretty tough. So once they get through this cemetery area, there's a large crypt at the center. What would a D&D cemetery be without one right there? So in the inner courtyard, there's a wight. And this was probably the worst thing they ever had in D&D, was having some of the undead have energy drain. They hit you, and you literally lose levels of your character. You might drop from level 7 to level 4 or 5 or something like that with one hit. Look at that, 1/4 plus energy drain. And depend on what the undead was as to how many levels it could drain and so on down the line. We don't need to get into that. But that was a horrible thing to have. I'm glad they did away with that for the most part there. They mention a little further along is a walled off area that contains 2 basilisks. So notice as you approach this area, you'll see a large number of chipped, cracked, and broken statues. And they tell you that they're in all sorts of poses. Well, if that's not a dead giveaway, there's a basilisk, a Medusa, or something like that ahead. Somebody wasn't paying very close attention. Then they get to this burnt dormitory, collapsed ruins, fallen beams, and so on down the line. So they tell you this area is dangerous, and there could be more things that collapse and fall on them, causing some damage. Then they get to this false slaver's lair. The walls of this chamber are linked with 20 human slaves. They're shackled together. It looks like they got an ogre with a whip that's guarding them. This is all a trap. In this area, these aren't really 20 slaves. These are slavers' minions right here. When somebody new comes to an area, they'll bring them into this area and see how they react. Do they try and fight the ogre to free the slaves, or do they act interested as buyers as they would expect? So it's a little test. So that's what they're walking into. So the party's probably going to think, hey, let's just kill this ogre, and all of a sudden we got 20 slaves to help us. Not going to work out. As soon as they attack, those shackles just fall away, and now they've got an ogre and 20 half-orcs attacking. They tell you near a trap door, there's also 2 half-orc assassins. There's also a fighter cleric in here too that's got 9 levels. So this could end up being the end of the party right here. So they mention how the shackles will quickly fall away and so on down the line right there. That's just a big old trap. They tell you as they go through this area down here in this hallway that they might be spotted by some harpies in a garden next door. In this garden there are trees, and there are 4 harpies hiding up in this area. They're probably not going to expect that. They move further along, they get to this water-filled passageway. It's going to be very difficult to move against the current, but they tell you they could actually take the doors in this area, unhinge them, and use them as rafts. Be interesting if somebody thought of that right there. Then they get to this main courtyard, a large open area. There's a gatehouse, a couple of portcullises. 3 orcs, right? 4 humans or half orcs or such in this area. And they tell you, if not surprised, they're going to flip over the tables and such and use them as cover. So if somebody throws a fireball or a lightning bolt at them, well, they're going to have a little bit of cover from all that right there. There's an outer portcullis winch area. It's got a half-orc fighter manning it. There's also another one on the inside. And here they tell you there's a half-orc, and what's interesting, they tell you he has just realized he's sitting in a room with a doppelganger. So he's trying to hold this doppelganger at bay. Now when the party comes in, if the doppelganger hears him coming, he's going to change into a slave and act like he's fighting or trying to get away. And of course, again, if he can get somebody in the party off by themselves, he's going to try and kill them and replace them. So as they approach the temple doors, there's a glyph of warding right there. So if they're not careful or detect that, that's going to blow up in their face there. Then they get to the temple chamber. Here they'll come up on double doors. There's a large open area, braziers, candles, incense, right? There's a gigantic statue of a one-eyed orc right there. There's 3 half-dressed orcs in plate mail, carrying halberds, a woman in plate, and a poor box, like a little collection box you might see in churches, and 10 slaves. Well, the woman's a 6th level evil cleric. Half-orcs are fighters that are going to protect her. And inside that little collection box is a troll that's been made tiny by a stone of diminution, if that's how you pronounce it. Works just like the potion. And they tell you 2 rounds after the party enters, he returns to normal size as he jumps out of the box and attacks. Pretty funny. Hiding in the shadows is also a 4th level assassin. And on the floor between the legs of that statue in this area, there's a trap door that goes down to the lower area, and that's where they need to get. So they tell you for tournament use, it's been trapped and so on down the line. For non-tournament, it's been trapped. For tournament, it wouldn't. So there's the ruined temple. There's a little room right beside this main chamber over here. It's got 10 sturges in it. Now you get down to the lower sewer section. Now again, here's where most everything is really at. Up above, that was mainly just guard posts and such with that temple. But here's where most individuals will be. So there's the random encounters. Again, they don't have those in the actual play in the tournament, but otherwise you do. And they tell you there's 3 types of construction down here. Dirt tunnels, sewers, and then passageways with rooms and such. They tell you if somebody uses something like a fireball or lightning bolt, some of these areas might collapse and do some damage, so something to think about. Not the best construction, but it's okay. So there's a ladder going down that there's lots of tracks in the mud, right? This comes down from the temple we just saw. Now this comes down to a grub hatchery. Again, remember there's these insect humanoids that are down in this area that serve the slavers. So when they come down into this area, it's full of garbage and muck. The air is steaming. There's 4 exits out of the area, and it's very nauseating. So this is a pit filled with garbage and sewage. Look at that, 5.5 feet deep. It makes like a slimy quicksand. But there are platforms with wedges that they can walk through in this area. They got a little bit of sewage on top of them, so they probe them with swords or spears or something like that, they could get through. Now in this pit are 5 of these insect people larvae, and of course they will attack. So that's going to be fun watching them try and get through that area and also not getting attacked at the same time. Further along, there's an egg chamber. 3 large insect creatures. That's the aspis. The drones are like the mature ones that fight and such. They're guarding this chamber. There's a food storage area. It's got a gray ooze in it right there. Those are always fun. There's some rock grubs. Here's something they had back in the 1st edition rules. These rock grubs, if they hit you on attack, they were automatically burrowed into your flesh. And just a few turns later, they'd reach something vital like your heart and they'd kill you. So those were very nasty. So here's an aspis chamber with 4 of these insect men and 5 giant ants. There they are, and you can see right here where this was used, right? Marking off hit points right there for all these individuals at one time. Then to get to the breeding chamber, there's this giant white larvae that's 12 feet long in this area. And also around it, a bunch more of these insect men and things such as that right there, and some leathery white balls. Well, that's basically their queen laying eggs, and those are the guards right there. And they also have some soldier ants to help them out. There are those egg cases. Maybe those could actually be valuable. There's some treasure. So there's a spare food chamber and ant lair. So there's the ant lair with all those right there found in it. There's the queen ant. They actually really try and protect her and push her out of there and save her if they can. Further along, there's a ledge trap that'll dump people down in what they call water, but it's actually sewage. They tell you that as they leave this area, they hear something that sounds like the thumping of drums. It's not actually somebody using a drum, but in the water, there's actually a cask. They call it a ton right there. But water drips on it. And they tell you that if anybody in the party moves it, the other individuals further along in the sewer will notice that thumping has stopped. That'll tell them someone's coming, and they'll be prepared. So that's something to remember about that region there. A little secret door, some sewer channels. Again, they tell you how you move at quarter speed when you're down in the sewage and so on down the line. Here's an Orc and Ogre Outpost right here. Now, these guys can be really organized. If somebody makes noise where they know they're coming, or they move that cask and that thumping stops, they're going to be prepared. They're going to tell you they're going to be found in ranks. Those up front are going to be armed with hand axes. Behind them, they're going to be using light crossbows. And then a third behind them are ogres throwing rocks. So if these guys are prepared, the party's probably going to be in very big trouble. So if the party enters from the northern door, this group won't be prepared. But they come from the other direction where the water and the drum was at, they will. So then there's a little sewer collapsed area right in there mentioned. They mention there's some beams and potential falling debris which could hurt them. Here's an orc guard post. They're going to see this brazier, and they're cooking meat over it and such right here. Up at the top, there's 6 orcs. They're going to be on guard, ready to alert the main chamber of any attacks. And if the main chamber is alerted, the party could be in big trouble. 24 orcs found in this area, and then there's the chief's den with a couple of advisors right after that right there. So further along, they'll even find a witch doctor right here with some bodyguards and such, right? So there's lots of orcs in this area. The witch doctor is actually a cleric magic user. Further is a gas-filled room which could explode if they're carrying torches and things such as that. And then they eventually get to the slave pits. So if you look at these slave pits, when they come into this area, they don't get to just walk on level ground. They have got to walk down these beams and these aspis, which are these insect-like humanoids that guard the area. There you can see one right there. Again, they can hold 2 weapons and a shield right there at least. Not only are they going to fight the party, they're going to try and knock them down into these pits. And if they get knocked down into these pits, there's an aspis in a control area that controls the covers, which are basically doors or tops on these right here. So these aspis don't actually have to kill the party members. They can knock them down into these slave pits and then close the door over them, and they're trapped right there. So they mention the main slave chamber right here. There's some merchants and slavers picking out who they want to buy right here. So there could be a big fight. There's also a doppelganger in there with them. Here's the machine room that controls those doors. And eventually get to the boss, the slave lord's den right there. And there you can see he's a level 7 thief or rogue. So he's the boss in charge, and he's got 10 orcs in there guarding him. So that could be a tough fight there. They mention the aspis. Again, they're basically insect-like individuals. There's the drones that fight. There's the larvae and the big old fat cow down here. The sundew, again, got taken out, I believe, 5e and such. That's an interesting one you could bring back. Here are the tournament characters. Again, remember, all this was pre-rolled right here, so you can see just exactly everything about the individuals. And notice how different things worked at the time, right? A lot of things were different. But, of course, you've probably seen that before. And here's even all the magic items and such that they had. So they told you exactly how they were fitted out with their gear. And then down here you can see how they scored the rooms. Remember, the maps were a lot smaller for tournament play. If somebody went into a particular room, it did something in particular, they could get plus or minuses to their score. So very interesting how they did that right there. And there you show the number of characters surviving, like number of like the entire party survive past room 4. You get this many points and so on down the line. So very interesting one right there. Hope you enjoyed this little adventure. Till next time, good luck and good gaming.